The Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'm Christine Redmond-Waldeyer. I've recently stepped into the role of Poetry Director following Maria Mazziotta-Gillen's long and distinguished tenure. I'm honored to continue Maria's vision and thank her for her years of leadership. I also want to thank the New Jersey Council of the Arts for the continued support, as well as Passaic County Community College and the past support of the late President Dr. Steve Rose and our President Dr. Jacqueline Kneevy. And of course, I'd like to thank Cynthia Pagan, who organizes and manages all our communication for our events. I'm happy to introduce our poet today, José Antonio Rodríguez, who is the author of 4 poetry collections, the most recent of which are This American Autopsy, cited as new and noteworthy by the New York Times, and The Day's Hard Edge. He is also the author of the memoir House Built on Ashes, shortlisted for the PEN American Los Angeles Award and the Lambda Literary Award. His poems have been published widely, including in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times Magazine, The Nation, The New Republic, The Missouri Review, and the Paterson Literary Review. His work has been anthologized, most recently in Latino Poetry, the Library of America Anthology, A Century of Poetry in the New Yorker, 1925 through 2025, How to Get Home in the Dark, Poems on Mental Health and Healing, and the 15th edition of the Norton Introduction to Literature. He holds degrees in biology and theater arts and a Ph.D. in English from Binghamton University. He is a gay Mexican immigrant and first-generation high school and college graduate who teaches writing and literary translation in the M.F.A. program at the University of Texas-Rio, Grande Valley. So let's welcome Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone, for thank you to the Poetry Center for making room for me. Thank you, everyone, for attending. It's been lovely. I wish I could be there in person. It didn't work out, but I'm very happy that we can do this. That's a plus for technology right there, right? Because they're not always pluses, but this one is a plus. I have to say, I do love Zoom. Anyway, here we go. I'm gonna read a few poems. Excuse me, from my most recent poetry collection. Came out a couple of years ago. The Day's Hard Edge, and I'll just go in order and see. Hopefully, the sort of the poems make sense. The small group of poems make sense together. This is the opening poem of this collection, and it's called "Not Even the Stars." Gray streets, a mirror to a gray sky. The city churned, buses roared restless. Strangers dressed for an audience walked with purpose. My muddy home, suddenly far from this unfamiliar city, where I stood alone on a sidewalk, no one reaching, no one claiming me, no one murmuring about the boy abandoned to the night. Rushing cold, with the dark so absolute, not even the stars would survive it. All this came to me once, inside a muddy kitchen, when my sad mother said, "Ya no te quiero." In this context, quiero means both love and want. So, I don't quiero you anymore. I was 4. Too young to know. That was the poem and its end. So I've come to the realization that I think a lot of my poetry is an attempt to get at the moments of life where language begins to fail, right? I learned this in graduate school, and it's a theory, but I subscribe to it. Language is a tool that human beings invented to try to make sense of reality. But reality existed before language, so language is ever only an approximation of reality. Reality is much more complex than language. The universe is much more complex than language. And so language is always ever trying to get at an accurate description, an accurate sense of the truth of reality. And some theorists argue that we never quite get to the truth because the truth is always sort of eluding us. Language is always a little bit failing us, but the effort is noble and worth it. And there are certain experiences that I've had in my life where I think we all have had in our lives, where we, at least for a split second, we're in the moment and we have no words for what we're living through. We can't describe it. And sometimes it takes a moment to understand it in our minds or whatever, to bring language to the moment and to then describe it and get a sense of it. And sometimes it takes years, to finally sort of speak the moment. And for me, I had a conflicted relationship with my mother and had very difficult experiences with her and in the world in which I was born. Uh, Being queer and et cetera, et cetera. So that it was kind of rough. It wasn't a particularly welcoming environment into which I was born. And there were moments where language failed me even at a young age. And I think my poetry is always sort of trying to sort of explore those moments and then investigate how bringing language to those moments, what the after effect of that is. Here's a second poem called Terrestrial, in memory of La Sierrita, Tamaulipas, Mexico, which is the village where I was born, which is just really an hour away from here, like an hour's drive from where I live now, or an hour and a half. But it is materially very distant from where I live now. It's very, certainly when I was born, it was very, very much not the West, right? Very little running water, no running water, very little electricity. So it was a different world. And when the sun left, the sky shone a black, almost blue, without electric bulbs to dim it, and so without shadow, only innumerable points of cosmic light, throbbing almost as if alive, their brilliance some elemental language that we could never decipher, a voice that could never reach us between our rounds of hide and seek, just beyond the pit of the cooking fire. So we did have a stove with butane gas, a little stove, but sometimes we ran out of butane gas, and then my mom had to cook outside, either in a barrel or on the ground in a pit. And those memories anyway stay with me and it inspired that poem. Um, here's a slightly we move forward, a little forward in time. This one is called Rock Hudson. So I am the first generation. Oh, excuse me. I came to the U.S. when I was 5. Of course, became very Americanized. I was so young. And I remember being 11, 12, and hearing about Rock Hudson in the news and equating homosexuality with AIDS, which was very much the thing in the media and in American culture at that time. And being struck by that as a developing queer child. So this one, so I wrote a poem called Rock Hudson. We were children then, so many of us, our tongues' tips registering only the faintest molecules of desire, already spiked with a mysterious trace of blooming lesions to purple in the space between the body and the imagined self. For years, I didn't know anyone who had died of it, but I knew they were out there. I'm the first generation that grew up with under the specter of AIDS, the HIV virus, and I'm still exploring that, in my writing, what that meant, as opposed to the generation older than me, which had already sort of come of age and then had to deal with the virus, and then maybe the couple generations, or the generation after me, which grew up with the HIV virus not being a death sentence. Because in the few years after the pandemic, there was we finally had a cocktail of medications to keep have the person make um, AIDS become a chronic illness rather than a death sentence. This one is called Tender. I'm very proud of this poem. This is one of the two poems that um, have been most anthologized. This one first appeared in the New Yorker in 2023, 2024, something like that. And it's a little bit more expansive. Also rooted in memory and played like a lot. Here we go. Tender. Thinking of how much my father loved flowering plants and how much my mother still does, and of how unfathomably hard it must have been to clothe and feed 10 children, with the most meager of salaries for tending to citrus orchards, for shoveling and irrigating and shoveling again. How he groaned when I removed his work boots at day's end, an exhaustion deeper than any well. Mom says his boss was a jerk, nothing ever good enough. After everything, that empathy of her for him, who'd never listened to her pleas because the priest said, all the children God will allow. The priest, who never saw her afternoons slumped by the kitchen table, a blank stare into somewhere my voice could never reach. Nothing to do but walk away. I swear this is not about the unwanted child, or what a therapist called embodiment of the violation, but about the strength and will to cradle the plants. Outside, the pruning, the watering, the sheltering, in found tarps and twine against the coldest nights, to lean into the day's hard edge and still find that reserve of tenderness with the bougainvillea, the hibiscus, the blue morning. Mm. 146. So another couple of poems. The last time I went to church. My father's body was in a casket up there near the altar, near the light, I've been told. The last time I went to church, my older sister asked me why I didn't weep. Not when I got the phone call, not when I entered his room, my mother and my aunt silent as candles, not when I lifted his body from the bed to lay on a stretcher bound for the funeral home, and clumsily banged his head against the narrow door frame, not when I thought then of the last hospital night, the timbre of his weeping, each sob smaller than the last, each, it seemed, both lament and deliverance after countless sleepless nights. No more, he said, no more. Not when I sat at his bedside then and held him, turning his shoulders until he said, "You're hurting me." A reminder of the ripples of our lives stays, hardly ever interrupted by touch. The last time I went to church, I told my father, who I'm told surely must have been sitting next to me, and free of pain, "I'm sorry about the door frame." Mm. I have to admit this this collection of poems is not like a is not an easy read. Uh, it certainly is an exploration. I think maybe my a lot of my writing is, but certainly this collection I feel is a more distilled version, and a more honest and open version of what I've maybe been trying to do all my life, which is um, um, explore the intersection of trauma, family, um, place, and literature slash poetry. So literature slash poetry coming in towards the end to sort of save the day, right? To give the speaker a kind of roadmap for how to navigate the murkiness of the past and the murkiness of reality in general. Because so much that we live seems contradictory and is contradictory. Um, we hurt the people we love. We don't always live up to our best intentions. We are social creatures who desire community, um, but we often also exclude and marginalize. And that happens I think in every level, whether it's in the household, um, or whether it's, a larger sense of community. Speaking from personal experience, I, for example, am the only queer person in my immediate family. I'm the youngest of 10. So I myself felt like a minority in my own household. I was in the closet for many years, and so it's been interesting to investigate that. How the silence of the navigating of that home life, shaped how I then navigate, right? How I then navigate the rest of the world. And certainly, of course, I think that, of course, that's sort of a universal thing. How we navigate our immediate family and our home is going to become the blueprint, so to speak, of how we navigate the world beyond the home. Um, and one way that I was able to sort of begin to make sense of how to navigate was through literature, through great stories and great poems that seem to embody, well, beautiful lessons and beautiful language, and transformative and transcendent language that could reach um, places inside of me that I had no language for until I read that poem or that story. This one's called Mercy. If you could ask the stars, those flickers that visit nightly, they would tell you it wasn't them who carved us from mud to marvel at our opposable thumbs. It wasn't them who forfeited God for a watch that didn't work anyway. It wasn't them who sometimes denied us the living mirror we named love. And still, you look to them for stories, for riddles, for answers that they never possessed. I'm not saying I'm better than you. Far from it. If you find me here erecting the same elements with these meager tools, wanting even now to give them life, that they may look upon me with mercy. I've been a prophet. I've been a fool. It's only in the last it's only in the last couple of years that I've sort of become somewhat comfortable with the idea or the concept of calling myself a writer. For the longest time, I kind of chafed against that label, and I prefer to think of myself as a person who writes, a person who does all these other things, but then also writes. I'm not sure why, but anyway, that was like my comfort zone. And so now that I'm like, okay, I'm a writer, I guess that's a proper label for me. I've been doing this for so many years. I also then now like to explore what that concept means. You know, how am I a writer? How am I a writer similar to other writers, and how am I not? How am I dissimilar to them? Um, and that so I think I was approaching something of that in the poem I just read called Mercy. And here's in the presence of sunlight. We're getting to the end. Yeah, one more poem, two more poems. In the presence of sunlight. Our bodies had limits, perimeters, edges marking the end of us and the beginning of not us. The flies hovering in space, the dirt floor stubborn beneath everything. The table too was rectangular every time, as was the door facing west and its modest field of corn or sometimes sorghum. A mesquite in one corner, a mulberry tree in the other, and when they started losing their traces, branches blending in with the purpling sky behind them, I knew to turn back to the kitchen so as not to miss it. My family slowly fading away, beginning at the edges, the nearest part of their bodies, always the last to go. Then the glint of the eyes, then hardly shadows with voices, humbly calling out, "The sun is leaving us." I've written about this so many times. And I'll end with Shelter, which is maybe one of the more sort of expansive poems that I've written. It's certainly one of the longer ones that I've written. So I think it's fairly straightforward, and so I won't. That's as far as I'll go as far as introduction. Here we go. Thank you all for giving me this space, um, and for making room for me and for listening. Listening to me and making room for my work. Here we go, Shelter. Don't misunderstand me. I love a good poem. Like half my Facebook friends, one that transports you to a corner of the soul you didn't know was there because you couldn't find the precise metaphor, even if you felt it. Like that time my parents saw a local news story of an older woman asking for help with an ailing husband, and I volunteered to drive them to the address on screen, a neighborhood I'd never driven through, though it looked familiar with its usual poverty. A few leaning boards called a house, and inside the woman from the news in half light, thanking us for the comforters in our hands and pointing to a fold-out chair where we could place them. Before introducing us to her husband, a scraggly beard beneath a crinkled blanket on a cot right there in what would have been the living room, groaning in the muted manner of those who know this is as good as it'll get. The woman's non-stop small talk about so it is, life's a struggle, and please stay a while, and take a seat, as if we were long-missed relatives. All this in Spanish, though I translated here because I want to reach the widest audience and not burden the monolingual English reader when they've already gifted me their time by reading this, which I'll call a poem, one that my parents can't read as they only speak Spanish with that poor Mexican lilt of apology, which kept them from interrupting the woman. A Spanish I've kept but rarely use, though I did that moment when I kept telling my mother, "We have to go," with an almost impolite urgency, because I couldn't bear one more minute in that near replica of the room of my childhood. Even as the woman said, "He seems to be in such a hurry." And my mother smiled, making excuses as we turned to leave, while I bemoaned my parents' passive politeness, so common in the Mexican in America, though by then I was already a grad student in upstate New York and down in South Texas for the winter break, between semesters of reading Adichie and Alexi and risking words together to find something like the point of this. Some search for the reason for the speaker's love of poems, that pull of the written word as artifact, as a kind of tool against the sometimes overwhelming sadness about all of it, including the fact that some of us, it seems, will never be allowed the time and energy to sit with a poem, like them, in that illusion of shelter, though perhaps they were closer to poetry's pursuit, that edge of oblivion where words begin becoming insufficient, the woman with her frantic speech beseeching us, and the man extending his bony hand out, as if from the cot itself, the tremor of it trying to say something that sounded like a greeting, that sounded like a plea. Thank you.